Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Lids, and we're back for some more Path of Exile 2, and it's been a little while. We were not checking in, or we were not doing anything last week on PoE 2, at least not on stream, which was in large part because we were looking for just what are the next big steps with our character, as level-wise, we are where we are looking to be, but still trying to finalize the certainly gear and potentially even passive tree for our martial artist crit based character. And so for a while, we had been acting on the assumption that, yeah, we'd want some variety of crit, but we weren't really sure what form exactly that would take, other than just that we wanted to experiment with the new martial artist ascendancy. But I think I've finally come up with at least a plan, which it's still somewhat tentative at this stage because I've yet to test it, but it's a little more specific than it was before. It feels like we have some of the direction that we previously were lacking. So that's exciting. However, we are still in need of making various changes in order to transition into this more specific crit setup. So that's where we currently stand. Basically, just a little bit earlier today, I was picking up one new, pretty critical piece of gear, but there are still many more pieces to go from there. So, as for what we've planned for today, as you may or may not have noticed, we are definitely getting a later start than I would have liked to have gotten. Unfortunately, it's not a coincidence. I just have had an absolutely insane work week right now. Every single day I've been getting back late because I've had more stuff I need to do, and yet somehow each day the list of things that need to get done gets longer. So, we're going to have to keep it brief today. It's probably mostly just a check-in of sorts, but given how we did not do anything stream-wise on PoE 2 last week, I figured we should at least do a little bit of that. So let me give you a little bit more of the specifics as to what the plan is, given how we, as I was saying before, previously we did not have that specific of a plan other than just pretty generic crit. So I suppose let me actually start with what we have here in-game right now. Basically, we had all the crit clusters that we would have taken on pretty much any crit character. So that's just the automatic, doesn't take much thought sort of stuff that we were doing. But that's why it felt a little bit generic and a little bit directionless. It wasn't clear what, if anything, we were trying to specialize in. And so that made it hard to do our gearing and figure out if there was any additional fine-tuning we were looking for. As I said, martial artist was one of the main reasons why we started going in this direction, because it was new and it looked like it might have had some crit support that could have been interesting to us. This being the primary source of that, the bells that we can spawn in that automatically get crit whenever they get hit. But technically speaking, that doesn't even require that you scale crit chance or crit damage, because it's just going to automatically crit. And since that's not really an enemy that you directly have any interest in damaging, it's mostly just a way to set off regular crits, and maybe you're looking for secondary effects from when you apply critical hits. Even that made it unclear how we wanted to scale our crits. I mean, we could have taken absolutely zero crit scaling and had a 0% crit chance weapon, because those do exist, and just seen if that still activates the critical hits on the bells here, and we could have been a critical hit build with zero crit scaling whatsoever. So even that was potentially in question. Yeah, that's an extreme example. That was a bit of a meme that I was curious to test, but probably weren't ever actually going to go that route. Nonetheless, point being, we really were looking for something to give us a better sense of what our long-term plan was going to be. And other than that, the other pieces for the martial artists, they weren't really helping us to circle in on that. We have the hollow form, the one that spawns all the clones, which was cool, but to be honest, this one I'm still a little bit on the fence about. That's the main reason why we have it. It looks cool. I'm not really sure how practical it is. It does consume power charges, which actually might be meaningful. But then we had Way of the Mountain, damage mitigation. It's straightforward. It's good both offensively and defensively, but it's generic enough that once again it didn't really tell us what we wanted to specialize in. Sure, technically immobilization to a certain extent, but not sure that we really needed to do much to make that happen. And then we kind of threw on Way of the Stonefist as a bit of an afterthought as our last ascendancy, because we didn't think we needed the second ascendancy point that specializes even further in the bells. So we were just messing around a little bit, seeing what this looked like when you put on different types of gloves and what the original stats would transform into with the new empowered Way of the Stonefist. And in fact, this may actually be the most important, the most crit supporting of all these ascendancy points, which is strange given how this was a bit of an afterthought. But one of the main things gear-wise that I've done to improve things... What's up, Sultan? One of the main things I've done to improve things gear-wise is that I did pick up a new pair of gloves. A pair of gloves that I think are just about, if not ideal, for what we're trying to do with Way of the Stonefist. So I tested out a whole bunch of different stats just to see what they would convert into with Way of the Stonefist, and with one potential exception, this seems to be just what we're looking for. So it looks like, in a vacuum, a very nice pair of gloves with a combination of defenses, life, extra levels for our melee skills, and then resistance and crit damage. But we throw it on, we find that, of course, with Way of the Stonefist, they do change into totally different stats. The defenses go through the roof, which is pretty cool. Basically, it's a pair of gloves with more or less the same amount of defenses you might expect from a chest plate, which is... that seems pretty awesome. Then we have the... So that's, as you might imagine, that's getting converted from the basic defensive stats. The less damage taken while on low life, that's actually what we're getting from the life roll, the base life roll here, which originally I just assumed that we wanted, because that's a really high life roll. And of course, life is usually something you're really interested in getting. It converts into 13% less damage taken while on low life. I'm gonna be honest, that feels like that's the least meaningful of all these things. I'm not sure we're gonna have enough life, especially as a likely hybrid life energy shield character, potentially primarily energy shield character. By the time we're on low life, it's a pretty good chance we get hit once, we're dying no matter what, and taking 13% less damage isn't really going to make a difference there. Was I pondering the thought of maybe trying to turn us into a low life character specifically for that reason? For a little bit. Technically, the single best form of critical hit scaling does come from being low life, but if I could just find it somewhere over here. Here you are. If we're on low life, we get 30% more critical damage bonus, which means all of our other critical damage bonuses are getting multiplied by 1.3, which is pretty huge given how much increased critical hit scaling we have. So, would have been incredible, except that in practice this is extremely impractical to implement, because it's not straightforward in PoE 2, being a low life character. Not in PoE 1 either, although I do think there are more tools in PoE 1 that have not yet been added in PoE 2 that just make this far less straightforward. Not the type of thing you can just add on a whim. So, even if it does have some interesting things that would open up to us, just huge damage scaling, probably too tricky for us to make that a reality, especially because the primary item, or really skill gem, that we would need to make this happen is something like hundreds of divines. So, basically would immediately double, or possibly even more, the cost of the build. I don't remember exactly what the cost was, but it was exorbitantly expensive. So, yeah, that, again, not the kind of thing that I think we could just stumble into on a whim. You need to plan around that and have that be a point of emphasis from the onset, unless you happen to have, hundreds or thousands of divines lying around, which I do not. So, for that reason, not gonna go that route. Maybe, unfortunately, oddly enough, the huge life roll might be a bit of a dead stat. Oh well. Everything else is quite good, because what was originally +2 level to melee skill gems, with Way of the Stonefist drops down to +1 level. However, that's also where we're getting that +11 quality to all skills, including some skills that otherwise would be just about impossible to get any quality on. Or other ones that seem to very much be balanced around the typical limit of 20% quality. So if you add an extra 11 on top of that, it can actually be pretty significant. So that one's sneakily, I think, quite good. For some skills more so than others. But then the cold res remains cold res, yes, but it also increases our maximum cold resistance, which is considerably harder to do and is quite powerful, so that's very useful. And then the other thing, really the main thing in many ways, is what was originally, in a vacuum, an increased critical damage roll. With Way of the Stonefist turns into base critical hit chance. And that base word is carrying a lot of weight there. Because what that means is that rather than, say, being 10% increased critical hit chance, which would be 10% of this base 19, so, it would be, still doing something. It's far more powerful than that, though, because, this would, if it were calculated in the same way, then it would be, a fifth, or slightly more than a fifth, a quarter of this one skill point. Is that really worth dedicating an important stat roll on your gloves for that? It's much better than that, because rather than multiplying this 19 by 1.0228, instead, this is adding 2.28 to this 19%. So our base crit chance becomes 21 plus, which may not sound like that big of a deal on this item when this item already has 19% crit chance. This item is insane when it comes to base crit chance. It is among the highest. It might actually have the chance of being the highest in the game. So it's a little bit of a strange example there, but it not only does this base crit chance apply to our attacks, which arguably don't need that much additional base crit chance because they already have a ton coming from this weapon, it also applies to spells. Or at least I'm pretty sure that it does. I really hope it does. So, I think it does. Take this random Frostbomb that we haven't used in probably a year, to ignore the fact that it's level 3, base level 3. Most of those levels are coming from our gear. It has a 13% crit chance. I mean, that's already high, actually, for most, relative to most spells. But in this case, it would be upwards of 15% base crit chance. So it just makes it much, much easier, mathematically speaking, to scale our critical hit chance, because then that 15% is getting multiplied by all these 10, 15% multipliers that we have here. So that is really the most important component. What's up, Warcrow? You re-rolled. You weren't enjoying the minions. Wait, was this in PoE 1 or PoE 2? Because I thought we established a while ago that despite thinking about PoE 2, you hadn't actually installed it. Although maybe after having said that, you then did install it immediately afterward. I vaguely recall this being the case. Well, anyway, so that's one of the big gear updates. We now have what is likely to be the single most important, at least primary piece of equipment for our character, and from there we can build around that and fill in whatever gaps we have and just try to maximize our other key stats wherever possible. But we needed a starting point, and I think this is a key starting point. Again, like, technically speaking, a little hesitant to invest in what was another very expensive pair of gloves just to replace a very large life roll. That just seems kind of silly. But yeah, I mean, looking at it here, oddly enough, that does seem to be, at least post Fists of Stone, that seems to be the worst stat on here. But anyways, we very well may just stick with this. Beyond that, I don't recall if I had this version of Grip of Kulamak when we last checked in, because again, we weren't streaming PoE2 last week because I was picking up gear like this, just doing a bunch of shopping, which I did not necessarily think was going to be the most engaging thing for us to do. But this one, as a reminder, Grip of Kulamak is one of only 2 rings that can give you crit chance, which is why it is very difficult to get good rings for a build like this. But Grip of Kulamak can have a humongous range of different rolls that can be completely different than this. So, in fact, it actually, mid-league, got a change to the types of rolls that it could get. So, before that change, I'd already purchased a Grip of Kulamak, which I thought was pretty decent for our build. Then, took a little while before I finally looked into, okay, what changes have been made? Can we actually get a better one? Now, post Grip of Kulamak changes, and this is what I ended up with. It has both crit chance and crit damage. The Grip of Kulamak comes with 2 negative stats. The 2 negative stats will always remain the same. It's always reduced presence area effect and reduced light radius. So that one, you kind of just have to accept those 2. Then actually, I guess say the primary different thing that we picked up here that we did not have on our previous Grip of Kulamak is this targets afflicted by abyssal wasting, which you automatically get on the implicit. That's the same regardless. So basically means any target that we hit, it'll have this abyssal wasting, and you inflict blinded on them, which is important in part because there is a cluster on the tree that gives us a lot of crit chance if the enemy is blinded, which we don't have at the moment. We could take it. It is, the numbers are higher than a standard, just base, or just a normal crit cluster. However, with this guy, we may not actually need that. The more important thing with enemies being blinded is that there is a support gem called Blind Side, which I may or may not have already started putting into some of our skills. If not, I'll just show you what it looks like real quick. It is key because it is one of the other ways we can get some more multipliers in there for crit. So it means that those skills can't inflict blind. Fortunately, with our Grip of Kulamak, we can find potentially any of our skills can inflict blind, so we just need to be mindful of which ones have blindside in them and which ones don't. But regardless, the reason why this is so key is because once the enemy is blinded, then we get 15% more, both crit chance and crit damage, which just makes it so much easier with the crazy amount of crit scaling we already have. This just makes it so much more efficient. So we really wanted to find a way to have enemies consistently be blinded so that we could rely on blindside. And I think we finally do have a way to make that happen. So that's why the blind effect on Grip of Kulamak here is really useful. And then didn't even realize that this last stat could be rolled on Grip of Kulamak, but I saw it and I thought if we could get it, that'd be pretty cool. So how good it is in practice, I'm not entirely sure, but abyssal wasting we inflict, which again, we're always going to be inflicting with Grip of Kulamak on. It gives targets a 10% chance to explode when we take them out, dealing a tenth of their life as physical damage. So, in PoE 1, there are a few items that make enemies explode on kill, doing a percentage of their life as damage. And those items are generally, or at least they used to be, now it's been a while since I played PoE 1, so maybe things have changed, but at least back in my day, those items used to be really good, because that meant that, sure, you take out one enemy, it explodes for 10% of its life, and yeah, obviously, if other enemies around it have roughly the same amount of life, that's not going to be enough to take those other enemies out in and of itself. However, if you either take out multiple enemies at once in close proximity, which, you know, most enemies are in a pack next to other enemies, take out multiple of them, get multiple explosions, the amount of damage then starts to become much more significant, to the point where it can start a chain reaction, where other enemies go down, they explode, and it just becomes a much more reliable way to make sure you're clearing out entire packs rather than getting some of the enemies and a few that still manage to survive. The other thing is that if you would have dealt a decent chunk of damage to some enemies, but they just need to take a little more damage to finish them off, then this 10% damage, that explosion, could be just what you need to, again, actually clear out a full pack rather than having some enemies that either went down and some that didn't get hit at all, or some that did get hit but managed to still survive. The thing that, unfortunately, seems to be, not ideal is that is only 10% chance of proccing, which I'm pretty sure most of those items in PoE 1, if I remember correctly, they were either guaranteed to proc or they were guaranteed to proc with a certain condition, kind of like if they were blinded, they would explode, or I'm thinking of, just based on how we were talking about blind being a precondition before, but I think more so, what is sorry, I've headbutted the microphone like twice in the past 30 seconds, but, what is it, impulses, if I remember correctly? The chest plate that at least used to make enemies explode for a percentage of their life as damage in an area of effect. But I think that one required that the enemies be shocked, which probably would be better than just having a percentage chance, because at least then you can deliberately make a point of trying to shock enemies, whereas in this case, it's 10%. There isn't really any way for us to improve upon that. So part of me was wondering if we could get another grip of Kulamok that also has that stat on it, and then, hey, at least it's a 20% chance, and maybe then it's a little more reliable, but maybe forcing a square peg down a round hole. It might be that theoretically it sounds great, but in practice there's just not enough chance for it to proc, for it to be all that significant. But anyways, that's one of the other big additions that I've made recently, which we had a previous version of Grip of Kulamok, but I'm not sure if I've shown you this one, with, again, the blind being the key difference there, maybe the explosion part. Then I think we were talking about this last time we were streaming, the Eventide Petals, which gives us the unique Midnight Zenith skill, which, when we crit, will create these ice sculptures of sorts, which we can fairly easily then destroy, and when we do destroy them, they create an explosion which does damage. So we're looking to maximize the number of things that we can proc when we deal a crit, so we get the sort of secondary and tertiary effects, which should be quite useful for a martial artist, because we can always do this with the bells that we spawn in, regardless of how much crit we're scaling on the tree. Obviously, we are also doing that. We should be able to get to 100% crit chance and big-time crit damage, but that's another way to benefit from all of the crits. And the damage itself could be decent. Yeah, it's a little hard to tell at this stage. We haven't really put it to the test all that much. The other pieces of gear, at least that you see here, are, I think, unchanged, either largely or completely unchanged. But the other thing that I have changed, which you don't see here, you would instead find here. Because we have picked up a couple of very nifty skill gems. Jewels, I should say. Jewels. The intention being, as you might imagine, crit chance, crit damage, yes. However, one of the reasons why we have this staff that I was just referring to before, not only is it because of the very high base crit chance, which makes it much easier for us to reach 100% crit with our attacks, the +4 level of elemental skills is also useful, both for attacks and for spells. It's kind of hard to get that from an attack-based weapon rather than a wand or a staff, so that's nifty. I imagine that increased elemental damage is local to the weapon and not global. Pretty sure, usually on a weapon it would have to say global for it to be global when it comes to elemental damage. But the big thing is that triggered skills refund half of the energy spent, which was something that intrigued me previously, which is what, in addition to the base crit chance, caught my attention with this weapon, but had yet to really explore that and see how far we could go on that front. What that means, basically speaking at a high level, is that there are several skills, generally all of the triggered, or technically not all of them, but many of the triggered skills, the way that they work in PoE 2 is rather than just automatically triggering after you do a certain thing, or something along those, like, cast on damage taken in PoE 1. Again, that one may have changed since I last played PoE 1, but that used to be after you take X amount of damage, spell triggers. So it doesn't work in that way. Instead, it builds up this unique counter energy when you do whatever the thing is that is supposed to trigger the skill. So, or say, cast on crit, as you might imagine, the thing that builds up the energy, the counters for triggering the skill is dealing critical hits. And as a critical hit build, this is something that we intend to be doing all of the time, and therefore should be generating energy for that all the time, and triggering all those skills very frequently. However, even then, it still wasn't entirely clear just how regularly that would happen, because I am oversimplifying the way that the math works on that. Basically, the regularity, the frequency of that spell getting triggered is based not just on are you getting a crit, but how much damage are you doing with that crit, or really what again, I'm oversimplifying, but what percentage of the enemy's health are you dealing with that crit? So obviously it's really hard to test that, see how reliable, how good, how smooth it feels until you've actually tried it out. And given how we're making various adjustments, I've not yet done that. However, there's a bit of a workaround with this whole refund half of energy spent thing that you see on this item. So basically, if you trigger the skill, say it costs 100 energy to trigger the skill, then once that happens, you get 50 energy back, so you're already 50% of the way toward triggering it another time. But it is possible to increase the amount of energy that these skills gain. So if we do enough of that, theoretically, we can bump that, I would think, again, have yet to fully test this, but I would think we can bump that refund one half of the energy spent into actually refunding all of the energy spent, which would functionally mean do enough critical hits to trigger that skill once, and then it's just going to repeatedly refund all of the energy and immediately re-trigger that skill indefinitely, without even needing us to do any additional crits. Like, obviously, yes, we would like to believe we're going to continue to do those, so we could theoretically scale or build up the energy the organic way, but why do that when we can completely automate it, right? So that is the other big thing that I've started to do with the I keep on calling them skill gems, jewels in particular, because there are a few clusters in the tree that can give us energy refunded, or I should say, technically there is one spot that can do that, but it's more so the increased energy gained. The refund is in all likelihood entirely coming from this weapon. It's just, can we use, for example, points like this, 5%, or rather, that's the wrong part. Meta skills gain 4% increased energy. Can we stack enough of those sorts of things to bump up what originally is half of the energy getting refunded all the way up to 100% of the energy getting refunded? So this cluster right here is quite convenient because it gives us all the things we're looking for. Both that increased energy and also some crit chance. And then this one, we're potentially about to do a whole bunch of passive tree respecking, which will see us taking this, which would give us conditionally even more energy refunded, although it is conditional. Yeah, it's conditional based on crit, which again, we should be doing just about all the time, but might still try to make it so that we aren't relying on this to reach that 100% energy refund that way, truly regardless of what is happening, even if we aren't attacking any enemies, even if for whatever reason we aren't attacking our bells that automatically spawn in and automatically get crit, we're still consistently, indefinitely sustaining the loop of triggered cast on crit spells. So we will get this, but the more consistent way to do it is through the jewels. So these have been exorbitantly expensive. This is where all the build budget has been going. Got, I think, this one at a bit of a budget relative to what I would have expected. But to get a combination of crit chance, crit damage, and meta skills gain increased energy at the values that we are seeing here is quite tricky to do. And then that fourth stat, triggered spells, deal a sizable amount of increased damage. I mean, this is basically a perfect jewel. I'm gonna be honest with you, I think you could argue this. I think the person who was selling this jewel potentially could have gotten away with selling it for a mirror. I did not pay a mirror for that. I did not pay anywhere near a mirror for that. But I feel like, despite it still being quite expensive, it was worth the investment. Because it's truly like an amazing 4-stat jewel. This is the one that I just picked up earlier today, which looks very similar. Still has crit chance, crit damage, and increased energy gained. In this case, the 4th stat is not quite as in line with those other things. It's increased elemental damage, which oftentimes will be relevant, but it does, of course, only apply if we happen to find ourselves using elemental damage. But, and this one, oddly enough, despite arguably being worse for our character, was twice as expensive? Significantly more expensive. Not quite twice as expensive, but... So these two collectively have cost... 2 orders of magnitude more than everything else combined. With the exception of this. This was a little bit expensive. And, okay, I take it back. Yes, still far and away the most expensive things collectively have cost more than everything else combined. Maybe by a single order of magnitude, but that's still a lot more. So, I think with these jewels and with the passive tree respecs that I'm planning to do, that we can get up to the point where we have enough meta skill energy gain increases that we can, when combined with this, every time we trigger a skill, have that loop infinitely. I think we're there. So that was the key threshold that I've been trying to get to this past week, basically just eyeing a whole bunch of potential jewels on the trade site to see if I could nab enough to make that happen. But other than that, as I was saying before, the other pieces of gear still very much need to be updated. The tree, I think, will be quite a bit respect. This is what the Path of Building looks like. It still has many of the same clusters that we're just seeing on the in-game version of the tree, but oddly enough, in large part because of the huge additional base crit that we somewhat unexpectedly saw ourselves getting from those gloves, I found that we didn't need to get all the crit clusters or all the crit chance points in the crit clusters that we had been visiting. Obviously, they would be very efficient to pick up if we needed them. We just don't need them. So, it feels strange, but technically, I guess that's the way to do it. Then, as I said, we're making a little bit more of a point of picking up the increased energy gained for meta skills. For a moment, I thought we might have needed to go into this cluster, which is the one that really specializes in it. You get the most here. And those are probably... Oh, and at one point might have even been thinking of taking the increased meta skill energy gained here. So I think, based on the way that I was calculating the math, that we would already have enough to infinitely loop the combo with these changes here and the jewels that we just picked up. But I could be wrong. If I am wrong, then fortunately there are these clusters that we could, with a little bit of extra points, find our way over to and correct that mathematical mistake. Obviously, in order to do that, we would have to sacrifice skill points elsewhere, which would be a little bit painful, so I'd rather not have to do that. I hope my math is correct, but perhaps not. The other thing, in addition to picking up a little bit more of that stuff, is that with the points spared from not needing as many crit chance points, I started going in this direction, and it's a lot of travel points, yes. However, I found that given how we're pretty much just looking for crit damage at this point, we don't really need crit chance. These guys, Jewel Socket 1, Jewel Socket 2, we could potentially get some pretty huge value from these Jewel Sockets, so seemed like that might have been the most valuable thing for us to pick up. Obviously, again, these could be things that we could sacrifice in order to pick up more of the meta skill energy if absolutely necessary. I hope that isn't the case. And then I picked up a little bit of spell crit damage here. For the most part, I'd been trying to pick up exclusively stuff that was scaling crit for both attacks and spells, but since we were going through this area, I figured, why not? It's only a few extra points, so... And given how everything that we trigger with cast on crit is going to be a spell. So basically, the way it's going to work, in all likelihood, theoretically, is we use some attacks, start the initial crit. Could be as simple as just doing it against the bells that automatically spawn in. Then once we have enough energy that first time to trigger the cast on crit spell, or spells, plural, then we have enough energy refunded that it infinitely loops, and those spells likely become our primary source of damage, which is again why, if we have to pick between prioritizing scaling attack crit versus scaling spell crit, probably makes a little more sense to prioritize the spell crit. So that's why I figured we ought to take a slight detour to pick up a little extra spell damage there. So those are the various changes that I've been planning, and in some cases starting to make. My hope is that after having gotten the gloves here, which, as I said, in many ways I feel like with the Stonefist character, kind of always going to be the centerpiece of the build, or at least a really logical starting point. By having this the Grip of Kulamak with the new blind stat, which is very useful for us, and the Eventide Petals Amulet. We got this a little while ago, but those give us the key pieces for the build. We have those really expensive jewels, at least the ones that have the combination of both crit chance, or all crit chance, crit damage, and energy gain for meta skills. We have the key pieces that are necessary. Any and everything else from here on out, I would hope, is kind of a luxury. Not anything that we absolutely desperately need. Obviously, we have, if we get more currency, we can get better chest plates, we can get continue to get more of these really good jewels, but even then, given how we no longer need to get more of the meta skill energy, I'm hoping that with those extra jewel sockets we're going to pick up, that it's not going to be quite as exorbitantly expensive to get those other ones. So from here on out, hoping relatively straightforward. If we can continue to farm up more currency, then we can get more ambitious with our other stuff, but I'm hoping that the brunt of the expensive stuff is done here, and that the more complicated niche stats that need to be exactly the way that we want them to work, I'm hoping that that stuff is largely done, and now it's just simple, straightforward. Oh, let's get as many defenses as we can. Let's get our effective life pool as big as possible. Let's, even the crit damage number, you know, obviously that's one of our primary goals, is to get that number as high as possible, so we can just focus on eking out every little bit of damage we can get there. Enjoying the amount of certainty. The thing is, Formav, I honestly don't know if you're being sarcastic or not. It is more certainty than we had before, but it is still relatively unproven, given how this is still largely theoretical and untested. And I have really not done much of anything at all with meta skills, with the whole energy build-up and whatnot, which is why I'm still not 100% confident that I'm crunching the numbers correctly, but I hope I am, and I hope that means we're in a good place here. And I hope that even if I am correct and those numbers are crunched correctly, then it still doesn't mean that the build is any good. Hopefully it is, but we haven't really gotten that far yet, so we're gonna find out eventually. So that's the gist of things, and I really just picked up the last, or the second of those two jewels, and I've not even done the passive tree respec yet, so that is why I say, you know, we still have a little ways to go there. I mean, we could respec the tree right now. I guess one potential hesitation I might have is that, yes, this is largely based around picking up additional jewels for these two jewel sockets that could potentially be quite good, but I don't really have any jewels for them yet. I probably have something that has a little bit of crit damage or a little bit of crit chance, but not sure I have anything lying around that has both those things plus a third or even fourth useful stat. So short term, technically it's not really going to be that much of an improvement, but we could do it nonetheless, given how it is the next step we'd like to be taking. Either that or shopping around, trying to pick up new helmets, chest plates, and all that stuff. I'm trying to think if there are any other major questions that we still have outstanding about, like, can we squeeze in one more helpful component that would potentially be somewhat difficult to build around, but or somewhat difficult to accommodate, but would be really useful to have. The thing that comes to mind there would be, as I mentioned briefly before, if we could get a second Grip of Kulamak, that would be great. And by if we could, I mean not can we afford one, so we technically already have at least one other hanging around in our stash. I mean more so... This, I think, was the previous one. It does have triggered spells deal a sizable amount of increased damage, which is nice. It has both the crit chance and the crit damage. It has the increased area effect for attacks, and that one's not really going to make that big of a difference for us. A little bit of a dead stat, or at least a not super impactful one. And then, as I said, it always has reduced presence area effect and reduced light radius. I might even have one more of these. But so we have a second one. The question is more so, can we still cap our resistances and or feel like we have a comfortable amount of energy shield and life if we are committing two rings to items that have no resistances and no life on them. That can be kind of tricky. So that would be the question there, and that probably just comes down to, can we get crazy high resistance and life rolls on our standard pieces of rare gear? And at that point, yes, that would potentially start to become expensive. Potentially quite expensive. I mean, obviously, you could get mirror tier chest plates and helmets and all that stuff. We don't need that, but could be the difference between being able to squeeze in a second grip of Kulamok and not being able to squeeze in a second grip of Kulamok. So that's maybe the one outstanding approach question or gearing question that we have, other than the very fundamental, hey, is this going to work at all question, which, you know, is kind of important, I guess you could say. So that's the gist of it. Oh, I totally forgot. In addition to that, as I was doing the Eternal Farm, I mentioned this last time we were streaming a couple weeks ago. We already technically got to a higher level than I was intending for this character. I mean, which is, you might say, Lids, why is that a problem? Why are you even bringing this up? Which, understandable, yes, but since when does if it will work stop us? True. This is all in the name of science, okay? But we already had one more level than I had intended for this character, or at least more than I thought we needed to get all the passive points that we were looking for, which is arguably kind of sort of meaningful if we're intending to eventually make a build guide for this character, because I don't feel great about saying, hey, you only need to get this character up to level 93 or 94. Oh, just ignore the fact that my character is 95. That was just an accidental whoopsie-daisy bonus level. You don't need that, just trust me. I feel like that just sends some mixed signals. But, that being said, in the past week, as I've been grinding up currency and resources and whatnot in order to afford some of those jewels, I accidentally got a couple more levels. So yeah, now we're 97, which is definitely higher than I want to be for build guide purposes. But if we do end up making a build guide for this character, we're just not going to focus on that aspect, because yeah, we'll just have a, you know, as said, some bonus stats that are not necessary. They're just purely optional. So with that being said, I believe in this Path of Building setup here, what does this say? It says 94. So yeah, that's around where I would typically like to have our character be at most for build guides, because I feel like any more than that, and you're starting to ask a lot for people to get that high of a level just to use the build. So, as we see here, this is actually less skill points than our in-game character has access to, even if this is probably as far as we'd like to go for a formal build guide. It does mean if, you know, there's things like, we'd like to have a little more evasion energy shield, then that's doable. Or, I don't know, I did, the other thing I did drop was there is crit scaling based on power charges, both here for these guys. Let me zoom in a bit. 1, 2, and 3, each of which is 20% increased crit damage if you've consumed a power charge recently. And then this one is just giving you 2 extra maximum power charges. So that one, really these 3 small ones, potentially if you're consistently generating and, more importantly, using those power charges, then that's 60%. That is pretty significant. And then there's also this cluster here, which the little guys don't directly contribute to crit, but the big one does. In this case, it's 20% crit damage if you've gained a power charge recently. So with this one, bonus damage if you've gained power charges, and this one, bonus damage if you've used and consumed power charges. So as it currently stands, we are generating power charges, primarily / exclusively at the moment, with our Killing Palm. However, for those of you who were tuning in last time, you may recall this one got us into a bit of trouble. We may or may not have been, kind of spamming this attack to charge up to generate our power charges. It's basically an automatic way to target our bells as a source of power charges whenever we want them. But those bells, they do spawn, it's relatively close to our character, but randomly as to their exact position. So, we were just spamming some Killing Palm in the middle of a boss fight, trying to charge back up, get those power charges so that we could then spend them all with a big Falling Thunder to do big damage. Except, we may or may not have teleported directly into a one-shot mechanic right at the exact moment that it was happening. So, ever since I have felt a little uneasy about relying on Killing Palm going forward as our potentially only source of power charge generation, and that is one thing that has frustrated me a bit in PoE 2, at least certainly relative to PoE 1, is that charge generation and charge usage is a lot more difficult to set up than it is in PoE 1, and is potentially much harder to benefit from, because unless you have these points in the tree, there is no inherent passive is maybe not quite the right word, but there's no inherent bonus from just having power charges on your character. You don't get increased crit chance just by having them floating around you. You only get that, in this case, or damage, if you've generated recently, or in this case, if you've consumed recently. So, for all of our previous critical hit, omni-crit, quote-unquote, characters, which we have made 3 of, technically 4, but I didn't make the build guide for the 4th one yet. For all of those other characters, for all of them? Okay, nope, I lied. For 2 out of the 3, we decided that it was not worthwhile to do power charges, that it was more trouble than it was worth. I kind of forgot that. For one of them, we actually did do them. But my point is that despite us potentially having a way to generate power charges and benefit from them on the tree, I'm still not sold that they're worthwhile. So with the extra passive points we've gotten from having gained a few more levels, maybe that's where those points end up going, but I'm still not entirely convinced that this is something we want to bother with doing. It is possible, for sure, with Killing Palm especially. It's just that Killing Palm is evidently going to get us killed. At least some of the time. And is that worth the price? I don't know. Maybe just being more deliberate and cautious with it is enough to feel okay about it, but maybe I'm just a little scarred still from that experience. So that's a potentially somewhat minor factor, although there are potentially a few other ripple effects for the rest of the build when it comes to our power charge usage or lack thereof. So that's one other thing that may end up changing. I think that's basically the brain dump. All the various ideas that I've been pondering and things I've been working on with the build over the past week, or really 2 weeks, I suppose, at this point. So, with all that being said, I wanted to at least get the chance to give you guys an update on all that stuff today. As I said, we got a late start, so didn't have a lot of time to begin with, and we spent a fair bit of time talking there. I don't know, I was thinking that we potentially do the respec now, although I did just talk you through it, and maybe, going through the logistics of it, it's not the most meaningful thing. You know what it's gonna look like at this point. Maybe we just pop in for a brief little map, or even, I've been doing a lot of maps outside of my atlas, just farming up the XPs and the currencies and the hive blood and all that. So I don't have that much additional progress on our own atlas. Also, I've deliberately been avoiding doing any big quest updates off stream, so that is kind of tremendously limiting in a way. That is like a absolutely humongous self-imposed handicap that I've given myself. But there may be one or two interesting things that we could do here. Like, for example, I got up to the Runes of King's March, but have not yet gone there. So we could investigate that. We did one map here. We would be close enough to get to the Withered Willow, which seems to also be one of the hub areas for a specific type of mechanic, kind of like the Monastery of the Keepers, and I imagine Runes of King's March as well. So we could try to poke our head in one or both of those places. I'm just very much looking at the time right now, because as I said, unfortunately, I am very exhausted right now, and I have a ton of stuff I need to do tomorrow and work as well, so I cannot make this a long, late night on a work night such as this. But maybe for that reason, since we have immediate access to Runes of King's March, let's take a look here, see what this is all about. Oh, that's interesting. Looks like sort of Northern Lights, but not exactly.
People of King's March deserved a kind of fate.
All they had built is now undone. Okay. So of course, King's March normally be the Act 4 town. It's a little different. This is the ruins here. Just curious what has changed. Some places you would usually be able to go that you can't go here. You can go on this boat still, though there's no one hanging out here. Dock might be slightly smaller in this direction. There's no boat on this side. You can't go back in this direction at all. The shop, well, you can go in. Not that there's much to do in there, it would seem. Still have the stash and whatnot. All these guys, all the expedition people, which makes sense. Okay, let's see what the deal is.
I've got workers restoring the forge. Tujen will need materials. Rog will need schematics. And this time, we should reinforce the foundations.
It saddens me to see King's March in such a state.
It was terrible. And so sudden. Felt like the world might break in half.
King's March, torn apart in an instant.
We weren't prepared. But then again, what would it have changed?
And we can't even drink, because the tavern is rubble.
20 years of progress, undone in the blink of an eye.
Dark times. We won't be trading anytime soon. And worst of all, still no word from Gwen.
Oh, Gwennon. I hope you're okay.
Oh, sorry, Rog. I'm sure she's fine.
Oi, you lot, listen up.
Oh.
You're all together. Good. I've got great news. I think I know where Gwennon is.
Hail, Captain. That's wonderful news.
Oh, do you really think you've found her?
I'm almost positive. I've seen signs of Gwennon in a few locations, all noted down here in this logbook. The only problem
Logbook,
is,
you say?
these are dangerous areas.
Then allow me to brave that danger.
I would go too, but,
The kids, Rog. You're right where you should be for now.
We must stay here. King's March and its people need our immediate attention.
It's settled then. I'm ready when you are.
Ah, okay. So she gives us a quest-based logbook.
This logbook contains all the clues I've gathered about Gwennon's location. We just need to chart a course.
Oh. Uncharted waters. Use a logbook to chart the area. Island rumors, nothing to drink, something fishy, endless cliffs. Consumes that logbook. Does it take us here? Or is it kind of, sort of independent from that? Because I sort of assumed we needed to go here, and then we'd be able to go to that spot. But maybe that's something entirely different. Oh!
Gwennon's out there. I know it. Now, all that's left is to set sail.
Okay, so does that mean we go back to the hideout? Oh, thanks for stopping by, Warcrow. Have a good night. Or night for me, day for you, right? Wait a second. So basically this just opens us up to the various maps out on the water. And this one, it's still not showing us what that is exactly. I thought the boat itself had an icon that was going in this direction or something like that. That's a unique-ish map. Yeah, wait. Is that icon? But that is the expedition icon, I guess. Usually those ones... The other mechanics would say you get an expedition, or you get a whatever category point on the tree. Now, I know that the expedition tree was added a little later than the other ones, but I still would have thought they would add that in. Okay, well, why don't we try popping in a quick map here? I really need to go to bed, like, now, so I'm gonna pop in a T1 and just keep this super simple, just for the sake of seeing if it's any different from a normal map, and we'll see from there. Oh, I did also, in someone else's atlas, just a random map, happened to give me a new passive point of the Doriani variety, which I'd heard about from the update back when it came out a while ago. That was part of the teasers that we'd already seen. Hilda was going to have some passive points, but Doriani seems to have his own category as well. Again, kind of knew that from the teasers, but I believe, though we have yet to actually see it firsthand from our own atlas, that is ultimately what we're going to get from the corrupted zone here in some way, shape, or form. Not sure if it's from the basic corrupted spots or if it has to be the corrupted nexus. Let's see, I've not yet looked at what Doriani's stuff does. Increased effectiveness of monsters per explicit modifier on the map. Rare monsters have 3% increased chance of monster modifiers per explicit modifier on the map. Increased rarity of items dropped. So, extra bonuses based on making the map more difficult. Maps have an additional revival up to 6. I think I would let a simple thing like dying interfere with our work. I was gonna say, the other ones, from Hilda's options, they seem to all be stuff that made content more difficult but more rewarding, and that was similar here. So I was surprised to see something that is just a straightforward, yeah, no, things are easier. Especially from Doriani, who you would think would be, you know, pretty intense guy who would be all about going high risk, high reward. Then again, he does experiment a lot with dead bodies. So the whole revival thing, on second thought, does make a lot of sense for Doriani. Oh. Increased expedition explosive radius, increased expedition explosive placement range. Expeditions only have 1 explosive grand. Expeditions only have 5 explosions. So this... there was something that did this before. Did I forget what it was? This is not... That concept is not new. The significantly reduce the total number of expedition explosives, but make the individual explosives much stronger idea. I mean, obviously, we're potentially about to do some expedition stuff, but it's quicker, I would imagine, which maybe is something we're looking for right now. So you know what? Sure, we'll take it at the moment. And I believe that stuff should all be immediately resettable and at no cost. So I don't think there's anything wrong with just throwing something on there. So, in the name of speed, let's hop in here. And this may very well be our only map of the night. I'm sorry, as I said at the beginning, I wasn't really thinking this was going to be the longest of streams today, for a variety of reasons. So, as it currently stands, obviously, as you may have been able to tell just then, we are still doing the Killing Palm and Power Charge stuff. However, I do have reservations about it. So, as to whether that remains the case, that is still to be determined. Oh, not expect that. Unique strongbox there. I think those guys are rare. Prevented from possessing a rare? I might have. This is kind of unfortunate. Oh, that is a rare. Okay, well, don't stand there. Oh, I'm pretty sure I have my especially aggressive loot filter on right now, so I was like, oh, that didn't feel great, letting the rare get possessed, only for it to not drop anything other than gold. Okay, so this is the unique strongbox that continuously spawns chaos enemies and then eventually drops a corrupted item of some whoa. It takes a really long time just because it's like non-stop wave of enemies, which is kind of annoying, which is why I may very well opt not to do that. Oh, that's volatile. Don't pick that up. I'd like to see how many this is. How many rounds? Is that 4? A small example of potential risk of Killing Palm teleporting us into dangerous stuff. Didn't really end up happening. Okay, this is the the actual full-blown expedition encounter here. Which, I don't know if we actually need to do it. But see what our options are, because I imagine they're probably not going to be great. Since, you know, what with this being a level 1 map, as I said before, it's mostly here for the speed, he says as he continuously runs into a wall. Oh, it's gonna be in this direction. That'll be good enough. These double guys. I'm still alive. You're still alive. Heavy stuns, yes, but there we go. This guy's obviously not pleased with us. Go down. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, obviously, we would like to get a lot more damage. That's a lot more than I expected. We'd like to get a lot more damage in the future, which we expect to be able to get once we've actually done many of those redesigns that we were talking about. I mean, at the moment, we don't have any skills that we're triggering with cast on crit, other than the kind of sort of cast on crit from our amulet. Creating those sculptures, those ice flowers. I try to destroy them, and it creates more. Okay, I would kind of like to see. This more or less looks like a normal map, which means I'm not especially interested, to be honest with you. So, what, by opening up the logbook, is that how we saw this set of maps appear on the Atlas at all? Previously, without doing that, these just wouldn't have even been here, wouldn't have had the option to go in this direction. It's not like that map was of any particular significance, other than that it gets us closer to, eventually, these ones that do have the guaranteed expedition and also have level requirements, which suggests that they have some plot significance, again, probably based on the whole rescuing Gwenin idea. But this one seems like it's kind of the culminating one. You start off with the level 6 ones, then you go here. Either this is the final, or it maybe leads you there. Although this would seem like one where, as was the case in the Atlas in the past, before this update, there are some maps where you have to investigate some of the neighboring maps after defeating the boss. One of them will have an interactable item that unlocks the more exclusive area. So it may just be that that's what we're seeing here, and whether that is truly tied to this exact quest or not, I'm not especially sure. We might be able to surmise from this. Explore the islands. That's kind of all it says, so not getting specific direction there, other than just that it has the icon over that map. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, basically, we did a few more maps. We could maybe make some interesting stuff happen eventually, but as I was saying, I just don't know that we have enough time, because I kind of need to go to bed now. I'm just wondering if maybe we do this guy here and make our way to the Withered Willow so we can at least check that out as well and see if there's anything that we immediately learn upon doing that. Though we did still learn some things by going to the Ruined King's March. It's just that, yeah, you have to go a little bit further before you really start diving into the expedition mechanic, I suppose. I was kind of surprised by kind of surprised by the amount of loot we just got from a pretty basic boss encounter. We put absolutely 0 mods on that. Obviously, it's not like we made off the King's Ransom, but still. Okay, let's just similarly throw on a simple tier 1, zoom through, I'll be honest, possibly even ignoring Delirium in the process. We probably do need to trigger it, at the very least, although I don't know that we need to progress the Deliriumness to any extent in order to have this count for the Delirium passive point and for us to be able to progress to the next area. So, we'll see. I'm hoping we can keep this pretty simple here. I also don't remember. Oh, Augury is this one. Okay. So I imagine, yeah, we have to activate this. This map is not exactly one of the better ones for zipping around. Kind of necessitates that you cover a whole bunch of spots. Yeah, so I'm kind of just not really paying attention to Delirium. This. Did I click that? I feel like that animation used to be a whole lot longer. Did they just make that animation quicker and easier? I feel like I didn't actually press the button. Oh, snap. I did not expect that. We got the big boy. I don't like it when he does that. But he is dead. Yeah, man. Stop getting stuck in the corner. Yeah. Oh, no, speaking of corners, as I said, this map basically requires that you run around all the corners. These stone altars. I swear I do not usually pronounce that word altars. It's the only time in my life I've ever said that word that way. What a walk. Keep playing. Please don't do that. Oh, that looks like nasty. Bother with just a triple over there. Oh baby, a triple. It's too late. I could not even do that. Oh dear.
A rare find.
Yeah, I was kind of close to getting heavy stunned there. And once again, did the delirium finish without us getting any bonus for it? Because that's what it felt like. Did I miss one of the altars? I thought I was going in the right direction there. Is it only 3? I thought it was 4. I guess we can find out. It's open? Oh, it is only 3. Okay. Should have remembered that, but for some reason I thought it was 4. Hello there. Dude, you had one job, and that one job was to not do that. Okay. Let's take a quick look at the delirium tree, because that is the first designated delirium map that we have done, so haven't really had much reason to look at this stuff yet. Yes, gain additional delirium modifier. Rare monsters always manifest delirium demons. Delirium fog spreads to all maps surrounding simulacrums. Potions dropped more often. But that seems good. That's obviously really good if you do the simulacrums. It also seems straightforward, at least. It's kind of nice. This one requires defeating the Delirium Pinnacle boss. If you're big on the boss dudes. Is this a fracturing mirror exactly? Just the ones that spawn the monsters? Okay, yeah. What do the minor points give? Oh, is that what they all do? Seems like it. Okay. I feel like we only have 1 point, so I guess it doesn't really matter all that much right now, but keep it simple, work toward one of the more straightforward ones. Okay, let's poke our head in that area, and then I think we're probably going to have to call it after that. Given the hour. Oh, that's interesting. I was gonna say, it doesn't really look like a town, then again, it is called the Withered Willow, so maybe that does make sense. Where fog and something? I only caught like the first word of that. We do have stashes, but what's the deal with Elder Maddox? Who is the person who you encounter in... What is that at that point? Is that Act 4, or is that in the... No. That's in the other ones. The name that currently escapes me. The Interlude Acts. Which means, technically, that content may not exist indefinitely. It will perhaps be replaced, which makes you wonder what they're going to do with Elder Maddox to reach this point, but alas.
Yes, this is it. The Withered Willow. This is where I believe the Raven Trickster was born.
How can you tell this is the right tree?
The tale speaks of a tribe driven mad long ago. Such a tribe was near to these parts. And this tree, it holds a secret. I am sure of it. Let us see. Come now, Winter Owl. I implore you.
Owl supposed to disappear like that?
Behold, the tree bore an illusion. But this mirror misses a piece. If we restore this veiled glass, we might learn the truth.
Does this mirror connect to another realm?
Patience. Soon you will understand. Now that the Raven is free, he could plunge all the world into madness. Spirit, guide us. If we've any chance of defeating him, we must uncover the truth beyond the tale of the Raven and the Hare. As we know it, seek the Raven Trickster within his fog. We must shatter his illusions to see his truths.
Okay. So give us a tablet for more delirium.
I didn't expect this to be simple, but time is against us. What have you learned?
Regrettably little. As much as I pursue him, he remains one step ahead.
Either way, the Winter Owl believes you've begun to ruffle the Raven's feathers.
Oh.
Are you following me, Elder? I'm flattered. Would you like to join my flock?
The Raven speaks. It appears we are on the right path. But what is this damn thing? One moment.
Uh-oh. Okay, so for what it's worth, just as a quick aside in case this does immediately end up triggering, I happen to have done a few simulacrums on other people's atlases, atli? Whatever the plural of atlas is. Mostly for farm. It's pretty good for farming XP and potentially for currency and whatnot. And I didn't really expect that to do anything for our own quest progression purposes, but it did drop this, and I don't know how significant that is, but there is a chance that that will immediately get cashed in and trigger a conversation. You might be scratching your head wondering, hey Lids, I thought you were just showing up here for the first time. Why are you having this conversation right off the bat? So just, if that does happen, that's probably the reason.
Very clever. You are a quick study.
My word, what am I seeing? Utter madness. Misery. Despair.
Remain calm. Tell me what you see.
It seems this is a decanter of sorts, clarifying all manner of horrors within, into a kind of essence. I can see emotions swirling in the liquid.
During my quarrel with the fog demons, I found something similar.
How curious. I've a thought. Take this, then approach the decanter.
I don't know that I want to. I was gonna say, yeah, that does sound like a lore way in which they're tying the emotions into the story. Technically, I think ire is the most common, so we're just going for the most valuable one. I think it is envy. I think it's basically in order here. You can also tell, if you look very closely, the art. Obviously, the color changes. That's the primary thing. but the shape changes slightly. It becomes a little bit larger as you go down the list. These first three might be identical, but there's a little bit more of a little edge there in that bottom right corner with this guy, and even more so with these two might be the same as well, but take this one. Oh, or all of them. Never mind. We're taking all of these as well?
Place the amulet.
No. Okay.
Go on. You return. What did the fruit show you?
A series of visions, each one more terrifying than the last.
I see. So, it was no premonition after all. Though you may see truth in the Raven's illusions, they are not real.
It was not all illusion. I saw the boy you speak of.
You saw the boy. You saw past your own reflection and into the Raven's. For an innocent child to become such a monster, there must be more to this tale.
As the vision faded, I took this. It called to me.
Let me see that. Is that the missing piece from the mirror? Approach the tree. Complete his mirror. Find the boy and learn the truth. Now, pour the distilled emotions into the decanter. Observe what manifests.
I think I might have gotten a little ahead of him there by starting to put this in already. Ah, okay. Let's make it a little bit easier to see. What can be used with one? Oh, hold on. Or was that actually preloading a helpful search term that I just deleted? I didn't even stop to look at what it was. It just didn't remember typing it in. Why I got rid of it. Yeah, it says can and still. Okay. That's specifically ones that we can with our set of stuff? Perhaps. Oh, I don't even remember seeing that one, but that might be the most valuable, actually, beyond this. I thought that was the furthest one to the right. Time. I mean, I don't have anything instilled on this. We're almost certainly not about to instill the primary thing that I'd be looking for, but is there any reason why we need to instill the item that you just gave me instead of something that we actually might benefit from? Wait, does that say... Oh, I thought it was about to restrict us to not instilling this because this is too high a level for these types or something like that, which would have been strange. But, okay, so is there anything that we could instill that would actually be kind of useful here? Preemptive strike we could, but we're already there, obviously. This... a little bit. Mana stuff over there. I mean, well, I would... Can I do this too? Maybe. Seems like that's working. Ideally ones that are further away. Melee. Attacks only. It is very good for attacks specifically, but yeah, not really. That would be kind of interesting quality of life, but in a vacuum, it would probably be this. If we were dedicated more to attacks ourselves. Yeah, maybe we'll do that. Otherwise, take something else that might be of some use, even if it's not strictly crit related, like say this. No, we don't have armor. Yeah. Maybe we keep it simple, straightforward, and actually, mana recovery on kill wouldn't be bad. Life recovery on kill, alternatively, but we're mostly energy shield. Originally, I was thinking it would be this. You. Yeah, we'll probably do that. Still feels like there's a easier way to make this actually happen. Like, press a button here and it does it. Fire, disgust, envy. The fact that I still have to do this is kind of frustrating. Fire, disgust, envy. Maybe... Oh, corrupted items can't be instilled. I didn't realize that, to be honest with you. Oh, that's... Ooh. 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 Was that always the case? That's actually... That's, like, kind of item breaking on this. I'm gonna be honest with you. I mean, obviously, we want and instill at some point. As I said, this was kind of a placeholder bonus type of situation where I was intending to later follow up with one that I actually had interest in going forward. But that's a problem. Okay. Alright, now in that case, we're just throwing whatever at this, and we don't really care. Sure, I'm just throwing the least valuable ones there.
Your hunger grows, but there's nothing you can do to fix it.
Okay, so this may or may not trigger this. Or it may just be a follow-up from us having used that item.
Such beautiful madness. The first to be distilled was unwilling, but the rest sought out their fate.
Hold your tongue, Raven. Most ponderous indeed. The liquids, they are gone. Imbued upon the very amulet itself. Adorn it. Let us see what happens. The amulet reveals a story. A tale lost to time and delirium.
Delirium, you
This
said.
tale's ending. It may not be to your liking. I suspect the selection and arrangement of emotions is important to the story. Keep your eyes sharp for these liquid emotions from the fog demons. Perhaps they will aid us on the journey. Now, I must tell you, the winter hour has shown me. The Raven's curse spreads. Here, his curse grows heavier.
Ah,
Go,
okay.
observe. But you must be strong, and do not listen to the Raven trickster's words. Be steadfast.
Okay, so that's a more significant delirium location. These ones give us the single point, but then this one... has to be tier 6. Still gives us a single point, but contains a mirror of delirium, and we saw some reference to that on the delirium passive tree. Okay. There's seemingly a little bit more going in that direction. Alright. I'm gonna be honest with you, delirium, at least given how at base, it doesn't seem to give you any rewards for completing the various tiers as the map goes on. That seemingly, to me, as of right now, is a pretty big turnoff, but I suppose maybe it's just now, as you're going through it, on an enemy-by-enemy basis, you can get delirium-based rewards. So maybe it just requires rethinking the expectations a bit for that reason. But at least with the rework, all the various league, or at least what were at one point league mechanic reworks for this particular update, I think the likes of Breach, I very much like what they've changed / added to that. The lore, the way they've integrated Delirium into the overall plot is clever, and I do like that, but from a just pure gameplay mechanic standpoint, it does feel like it perhaps detracted a bit, if that is how it works now, where the various tiers, you know, how far you progress in the deliriousness throughout the map, if that doesn't really impact things, and it's just sort of a, well, as you go, things will occasionally pop up. That doesn't feel quite as exciting, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe as we spend more time doing it, invest more points in the delirium tree, so on and so forth, maybe that dynamic will change a bit, but at least as it currently stands, it does kind of feel like delirium's a bit of a snooze fest, to be honest with you. But we'll see. We'll see. It does obviously spawn in more enemies, so it does add extra elements in that way, and it does occasionally spawn in bosses, as we saw on the previous map as well. Just feels like the risk-reward balance there is, from what I can readily see, does not seem very well balanced, but it may just be that the benefits are not as outwardly apparent. Like, maybe it's fantastic for experience. It does seem like, from what I've seen on various public lobbies, that people are making a point of doing very high delirium maps, and so maybe that's the idea. It's more so for experience rather than for drops, or maybe those emotion drops are good enough that alone makes it worthwhile. I don't know, but just my relatively first, I guess it's not really first impression at this point, but my current opinion of the state of delirium is definitely worse than my current opinion of Breach, which is comparatively much higher. Does Breach make my game crash 50% of the time whenever someone initiates it? Yes. Does that make me extremely frustrated? Yeah. But when it works, I do think that that is probably my favorite of the various league mechanics, at least off the top of my head. But anyways, as I said, it's getting quite late now. I know we got a very late start, so we haven't been going for that long, but it's a work night, and I just really can't go any later than this. In fact, I've already probably gone later than I should, so do need to wrap things up here. Hopefully, at the very least, gave you a sense of what I have been doing with the character and what the intention is going forward with gear and the tree, and we investigated a little bit some of the league mechanics that, yeah, you know, I've experienced in a way, right? Some of these things are just not really new. Obviously, Delirium and Expedition existed before this update, but they've been changed, and obviously they've been integrated into the story much more. I have done those mechanics in other people's lobbies, as I was saying, so it's not like it was a whole new world, but we got a different perspective, and the lore aspect of it, the way it was integrated into the story, that part really was new. So that was more interesting for that reason. But with that being said, I do need to wrap things up here. So thank you all for stopping by. I know we had to keep it short, but hopefully in a not so distant future we can have a more in-depth look at. I mean, I don't know exactly how long it's going to take us to make those character updates, but hopefully we'll be able to experience that and experiment more with the gameplay once we have all that stuff set up. This was, of course, our Path of Exile 2 stream. As for our streaming schedule, it is somewhat subject to change, given how, as I was saying, it's pretty tough to squeeze these in on a work night, especially when I get home late from work. So, when we can, we've been doing PoE 2, and when it makes sense for the current state of our character and what we're working on, we've been doing PoE 2 streams on Thursday nights, occasionally Friday nights. Otherwise, Friday has been the Mass Effect Andromeda multiplayer night. Then Saturdays, we're doing Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, and then Sundays, we are doing Pyre multiplayer. If you liked this stream, then you can, of course, hit the like button. That is much appreciated, and also you can hit the subscribe button, of course, to catch more of the things that we are doing here on this channel. But actually, the best way for you to do that is by joining my Discord server. And you can do that. Give me just a second. Let me copy the link in chat. Discord. You can do that by clicking on that link right there. But that's going to be it for me for tonight. So thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed the stream. And I'll catch you next time.